We are talking with legendary driver, builder, designer, and on. Our good friend Peter Brock. Where we left off, we had kind of wrapped up the Shelby years.
Yeah.
So the next thing you did is worked with a new company called, well, new to the United States anyway, called Hino. Tell us about that.
It was interesting because the Japanese were starting to come into the American market sales-wise. The two leading names at that time were Nissan, of course, and Toyota and Honda. So surprisingly enough, there was a guy named Don Nichols who was building some really trick race cars with another friend of mine who's a great designer, Trevor Harris, called The Shadow. And he knows who all the top designers are and what's going on, and he wants to build this revolutionary car. So that's his direction. The other thing he wants to do, because he's a big name in Japan, he knows Bill France and understands how big Daytona stock car racing is and realizes that could be a big thing in Japan. It turns out that Don has another friend, an American friend. His name is Bob Dunham. And Bob is another sports car fan, but he can't get anywhere near the big factory stuff. So he's made friends with some people, a small enthusiastic group of people at a large company that builds trucks and buses called Hino. Now, nobody's ever heard of Hino, but they're a huge company. But there's a small group within there that want to build a high quality, small little car. So he talks to them and they're interested in doing something. And he's telling them, if you can't build it yourself, why don't you take it to California? And Don Nichols knows this guy over there that can do it. So Bob Dunham comes to the United States with a little Hino 900, which is basically a Japanese version of a Renault, little four-cylinder awful like car. I mean, just got swing axles, solid water-cooled motor in the back. I mean, you couldn't come up with a worse type of layout on the car.
You're good, but you might not be that good.
Yeah. So anyway, the other problem is in the United States, because again, the SCCA runs road racing in the United States, there is no sedan racing. There's none at all.
Yeah.
If it hadn't been for a guy named WRC Shedenhelm, who was a tech writer for Sports Car Graphic, who saw, there's all these guys in California that's got Volkswagens, they got Mini Coopers, they got Lotuses, they've got all kinds of these little foreign cars, and they all want to run some little sedan races because it's cheap. So he goes to the Cal Club and says, hey, if we can show up with 20 or 30 cars, will you give us a class to run? And they said, sure. So that was the beginning of sedan racing in the United States. They sent over this car with Bob Dunham, and I said, I'll build the car for you and prep it for a year, and you run it in California and see how you like it. And then when you go back to California, you leave the car with me. It's my car. So it's a cheap way for me to get a little race car and go racing. So we did that for the year, and we did pretty good. We were finishing, second or third on occasionally. And he goes back to Japan, and he's got all this information on it. So the Japanese are interested now. This is a way for them to get into the American market. So they have already decided that the way to do it is going to have a great Italian designer design a body on. So they go to Michelotti, and they come up with a really beautiful little car called the Contessa. I'm over in Italy working on the Di Tommaso Can-Am car at that time, and they wire me, will you come over to Japan, and we'd like you to see this new car we're working on. This is totally out of the blue, And so I go over to Japan, and they've set up a whole test thing at Fuji Speedway, and they've got a couple of cars and their team driver in this nuke thing, and they're planning on trying to bring this car in the United States market. And after driving this little funny looking 900 car that was, pretty awful, coming and seeing this beautiful little, Michelotti design coupe and stuff, it's pretty exciting. They've rented the track. The problem is we're having a typhoon during the time that they've rented it. So we drive out to Fuji Speedway, and it's raining so hard you can't even see the road, We go through this whole ritual of evaluating the car, and they say, thank you very much, goodbye. And I go back to California. I never heard another word. I thought it was all done. A few weeks later, they call and said, we'd very much like you to be our American distributor, and we're going to give you the race cars to run in the United States. I'm completely blown away. So fine, we got to. So the big race that's coming up is the Times Mirror Grand Prix.
Yeah.
That's the biggest race in the country. So again, as I explained, the Japanese are trying to figure out how to come into the American market and how the Americans use racing. So every top promotional PR guy, press, everything Japan has come to the Times Mirror Grand Prix to see how Americans go racing. As an opener for that race, the Cow Club decides they're going to get all these funny little sedans out there, and they're going to have a race called the Times Mirror 100. And it's a chance to run all these little sedans. So we build up two really hot-looking little Hino Contestas, and Bob Dunham comes over, and man, I built some really hot little cars. So anyway, we got like a 20-car field of everything that you can imagine out there. And the bottom line is that I win the race and Bob is second. So we're 1-2 Japanese cars, and nobody in the world has ever heard of a Hino. But all of the Japanese press is there, and they've come to watch this big Grand Prix, and all of a sudden they're focused on this thing of this Japanese car that in Japan, they're the lowest car on the pecking order, because there's Nissan and whatever, and Toyota, and there's Honda, of course. And Honda's going off in Formula One. So the two big sedans, of course, are Nissan and Toyota. And here Hino blows these guys off. And, I'm getting all these business cards, please go to work for us, whatever. And I've got this great arrangement with these people with Hino. I said, sorry, these guys brought me to the dance. That's who I'm going to stick with. So they say, we love what you're doing. You're going to be the distributor for the United States. We want you to design the new cars for us. We want you to run the racing team.
Wow.
I thought I'd died and gone to heaven.
Yeah.
So I'm just about a week from going over there to sign the contract to do this. Their head guy dies of a heart attack.
Oh, damn.
So I've got, the other interesting thing that happened during that period of time is that I'm working with the chief controller of the company. And he says, what do you foresee us doing in the next several years? It's not just 1 or 2 years running these little sedans and stuff. What would you like to do? And I said, I think we should build a GT car and go to Japan. He said, what does that cost to do? And I said, well, we can build a prototype or whatever. And he says, my board of directors would never understand that. But he says, well, write that into the contract and put the money into the sedan racing program, and they won't tell anybody about it. So he gives me the project to design a car, which I call the Samurai. And that's the plan, is that we're going to run that at the Fuji Grand Prix and then take it to Le Mans. Now, there's a real problem because nobody there, everything is done by consensus of board of directors, and nobody knows what to do because this is a one company. Like Honda is run by one guy. Hino is run by one guy. Every other thing is run by a board of directors. So they don't know what the hell they're going to do. So typical Japanese style, every company owns a little percentage of every other company because they all share risk. So the big problem is that Toyota can't sell any cars over here because they're all copies of English cars that blow up on the freeways, long stroke motors and stuff. But the one thing that they're selling a lot of is pickup trucks. Who builds the most pickup trucks in Japan? Hino.
Yeah.
They go in and they buy up all the stock they can and they make a hostile takeover and take over Hino. So now they control Hino. So they send their representative, Toyota representative, over to my company, and I'm working on all the race cars. I don't know what's going on in Japan at all. All I know is we're going to, build cars that go race in Le Mans and race these cars. Comes in, he's going through, checking off everything in the shop, and here's this Hino going together, the Samurai. What's this car? And I explained that it's a car, it's a GT car we're building. And the Japanese normally never, there's no expression change. This guy couldn't believe what he was saying, He says, explain again where this car came from, because it's not in all the stuff that I've bought. How can you be building this car? There's no contract for it or whatever. So I said, well, I'm planning on going to the Japanese Grand Prix with it. He says, don't worry about it, we'll buy the car. And I said, well, it's not really for sale. And he says, well, okay. So he goes back to Toyota, and they come back and said, no, we want to buy the car. I said, it's not for sale. I said, how much is it going to be? So I give him a figure. Yes. Okay, we'll buy the car. And we want you to run our racing program. Oh, okay. So what cars do you want? Oh, they're 2000 GTs. It's really neat cars. So all of a sudden we're elevated into the trick racing program for Toyota. They're going to buy the car. It's going to become a Toyota. And so everything's wonderful and lots of money is coming in. And in the meantime,
Your old buddy comes in again.
yeah, you know, and I don't think he even really knew that we had this program going. They had already gone to talk to Shelby, and, you know, he told them that he could run the program and run the 2000 GTs and stuff. So they're making a decision in Tokyo. Are we going to hire this guy that has won all the races in the United States? He's the top United States road racing championship. He's won Le Mans. Or are we going to hire this kid that nobody's ever heard of, you know, with Hinos? So they make the decision that they're going to give the program to Shelby.
Yeah.
And they don't tell me. So, you know, I've hawked myself to the eyeballs, you know, bought a new engine dyno from Hino and Froud, hired some new guys, got going in the shop and everything. And I'm waiting for the car and I'm calling, you know, and, well, you know, we've got delays on it, whatever. I haven't got a clue what's going on, you know. So I get a phone call from a guy at Shelby's, who's a good friend. And he says, you know, you're not going to get these Toyota 2000 GTs. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, the cars are here at Shelby's. Going, I said, no way. I said, I've got a contract in my signed contract in my hand right here. And he says, well, you're not going to get them. So I finally figured out what was going on, and I didn't have any money, legal money, to go fight it or anything on it. So they just come in and pick up all the stuff and go away with it. So as I went down to Nissan, and of course the bottom line is that they didn't want to talk to anybody because they didn't feel they had a car that was good enough. And so I called my friend back, who was the controller at Hino. Of course, he's still, you know, working on the negotiations with Toyota, and explained the situation to him. And I said, you know, I think that I can, you know, build a pretty good car. Now, I've worked with these people for 3 years. And he says, I know somebody at Nissan Motor Corporation. He said, let me go talk to them, and maybe I can do something for you. So he calls back 2 days later and says, I got the racing program for you, and we're sending you 2 cars, and you're all set for running the season. I'm going, how did you do that? He says, well, I called my friend. He said, he's my school friend. I said, well, who is your school friend? He says, he's the chairman of the board of Nissan Motor Corporation. And
So
I
these
told him that
were-
we had a good, honest relationship with you for 3 years, and that you feel that you can do pretty well with their cars and go against Toyota. And of course, that
So these were 510s, or did you start with roadsters?
started roadsters, a 2-liter roadster.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. So the bottom line is we get these cars, and in secret we build up the cars, and we show up for the first tech at the race with all these really nice looking cars that our crew has built. And these guys show up with Nissan with this, you know, club car that this guy's being paid for. And they're going, where did this all come from? You know. So now they're really pissed at me because I've gone over their head and got the program out of Japan, which they couldn't get. And we go down, and the bottom line is we win the Pacific Coast Division Championship in the first year with the cars, and embarrass Shelby. And they didn't make the qualifications to go to the runoffs, and we did.
Yeah.
So that was the real thing. That
So the
came out.
2000 GTs were in C prepared, weren't they?
C production, yeah. We had to run in D production in the first year. And then the second year, you could run in C production if you put Makunis on
Yeah,
them.
you had the 2 liters.
Yeah. But the problem was that the first 240Zs that came in had been built for the low buck because the Japanese engineers didn't know the American rules for road racing here were that you had to build your race engine out of the production car. And the rules are you can take anything off the engine, you can remove all the metal, polish it, lighten it, but you can't add anything. And that car had been built with a 2-liter twin cam with a really trick engine and
No,
stuff
that's
in it
right,
for
yeah.
FIA racing.
Yeah.
So that was where all their money had gone in developing that engine. So their instructions were to build a very inexpensive motor to come into the American market. So they designed to build it for the cheapest amount they could, not knowing it was going to become a race engine.
Yeah.
So when we received those engines and put them on the dyno, they just blew up because they were all cheap parts, So we went through a very complicated development program, explaining to them what had to be done. We had to put counterweights on the crank. We had to have, balancers on the front end. We had to change the cylinder head, so we sent stuff to them. And bottom line is they made the new cranks for us, so we got them in, and we got them in halfway through the season, and we could now make the engines run. And with those race engines, we were able to compete with the Porsches and the Triumphs. And we won the United States Road Racing Championship for C production, beating Triumph and beating Porsche.
You had a new driver on board too.
And we had a new driver
from El Segundo.
From El Segundo. So even though Frank Manise was our top driver the first year, we brought on John as our second driver.
That's John Morton, by the way.
And John Morton absolutely made those cars magic because he had to fight his way up running the Mikuni 2-liter Roadster for half the season running against the Porsches and Triumphs. So he was doing a fantastic job just to finish third with that car. But that kept us enough in the points that we could go to the championship. So when we went to the championship, we finally had the 240Z developed, and we went down there and cleaned house.
Yeah.
So that was that whole thing with Nissan, and then consecutive national championships, 2 years, and then we took over and started running Trans Am cars as well.
That's right.
And that's when the big factories started coming into Trans Am as well. So that whole period was all changing completely. American racing was becoming professional, and we had some fabulous races. All for sedans, for sports cars, everything. Racing really, really changed on those particular years. And if it hadn't have been for Shelby making those changes to bringing the Cobra in, nothing like that would have ever happened. So that was really the important thing that Shelby did.
So then you got out of racing for a little bit and started designing. They were doing homemade hang gliders right at the end of the LAX airport runway, weren't they?
Right. I was driving home one day and saw these guys. They had been building a big power plant at the end of the runway, and to build that power plant, they had to really dig a big hole in the earth, and they moved all the earth over to the side on it, and they made this giant sand dune. And what was happening is that there were a bunch of hippies up there flying hang gliders, and made out of bamboo and visqueen and duct tape and whatever, and they were, it was only a couple 100 feet high, but you'd go up there and then you could fly all the way down, about 100 yards down to the seashore. And it was really a lot of fun stuff that was going on. So I stopped one day and walked up to what's going on and watched these guys, and it looked like a lot of fun. So this guy had trotted this thing up to the mountain. He's all out of breath. He said, "You want to try it?" And I said, "Sure." So how do you make this thing work? So he explains the whole thing out to me, how you hook in and how you balance the thing off and you run off and take off. So I take off with this thing and I make this perfect flight all the way down to the water. And I'm flying, and it's maybe only a, 15-second flight or something like that. But it was the most exhilarating thing that I think I ever did. I said, God, this is really something cool. So I said, I can build a better glider than these guys,
So
I
you
went back
changed
to
that world next.
So the next thing, I made up a whole kit on how to build hang gliders, and with all these little parts and pieces and everything, the guys could build their own gliders with. So I took that out and showed it to all these hippies guys, and boy, everybody's really excited about it. And I said, "Do you want to buy it?" And he said, "Yeah. How much?" I said, "Well, it's about $6. $6? That's a ripoff, So I couldn't believe it, for $6, building the whole kit that they could build it. So I said, okay.
Maybe you picked the wrong market this time.
So I went back and started building my own hang gliders, of course, and I came out and they were the best hang gliders out there. And we got in the hang glider business, and, bottom line is we ended up being the largest hang glider company in the world.
Wow.
At that time, and changed the whole sport. And And we went from flying off a 200-foot sand dune on the beach to flying at 10 to 15,000 feet and going hundreds of miles, you know.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
probably the most exciting era of
You're
stuff
kind of
that
like
we
the
ever
Wright
did.
brothers of hang gliding.
Yeah, it was absolutely sensational. But we began to run into legal problems. So I decided, you know, we're going to get out of the hang glider business because there's just no way to continue on it.
So you kind of semi-retired and became an automotive journalist.
Yeah, for
And a
while,
photographer.
yeah. Well, that all started because I wrote the book on designing the Daytona coupes and what happened at Shelby and stuff. And, you know, just wrote that whole history up. And when the book got out, I started getting offers to, you know, write some more stuff on it. And I remember one call, somebody asked, would you like to go over and cover Le Mans for us? And I hung up and said, no, I'm sorry, I'm teaching history of automotive design up at the school, and I don't think I've got time. And I hung up and said, are you crazy? Calling right back. And so I went to Le Mans. That was the start of my career as a journalist. You know,
You've been writing for us for about almost 20 years.
Yeah, right.
And then you designed a little trailer.
So I started looking around for trailers, and I couldn't find a trailer that I liked. So I said, well, you know, I think I can design a better trailer that's out there. And so the next thing was trying to find somebody to build it. And I went around all the trailer manufacturers and showed them what I wanted to do, and they said, no, that's a stupid thing. We can't.
That'll never work.
That's not going to work, you know. So luckily I found a guy that made custom trailers for rodeo up in British Columbia, and he agreed to build the trailer the way I wanted to build it. So I built my trailer, and I was happy. I took it home, and the minute I got it home, I called back and said, can you build another one? Can you build another one? And pretty soon we're into production. And finally it got to the point, he says, look, if I continue doing with these, I'm going to cut off all my rodeo cowboy friends. And he said, I can't build any more than you're doing.
Yeah.
So at that point, Gail looked at it and said, we're in either the trailer business or not. And I said, you know, I guess we decided to do the trailer business. And its success is totally Gail.
We could stay here all night. Always
Okay.
a joy talking to you, my friend. I appreciate it. And
All right. Great.
if you like this sort of stuff, please
Yeah.
subscribe to our channel, and go to ClassicMotorsports.com.
Support brands that support Classic Motorsports. Get your chemical solutions from CRC Industries. Visit crcindustries.com to learn more.